Do you love coffee? You need to watch this video. You may not care about the weather, which is fine, but your wallet at a coffee shop certainly does. Because what we're setting up across Southeast Asia right now could have a straight ripple effect across coffee supply and prices. Hey guys, Dr. Fergus Keating here with weathermapping.com. Unseasonal rains are running well above normal across parts of Southeast Asia, from Myanmar through Vietnam, while much of Indonesia sits closer to or slightly below normal for seasonal rainfall. This is creating a split risk between flooding on the mainland and moisture management for crops across the islands. This is the next 15 days of precipitation across Southeast Asia. First, we're going to look at total rainfall in millimeters, then move on to percentage of normal for the same period. We're going to go region by region on the totals first to pin down where the most rainfall is expected to be. Then we'll switch to that percent of normal map to show where it's unusually wet or dry. Let's have a quick look at the metrics here. On the total precipitation map, values are the sum of the forecast rainfall over the next 15 days expressed in millimeters. On the percentage of normal map, that same forecast is compared to what's typical for this 15-day window, then expressed as a percentage. Let's give an example. If a place normally gets 100 millimeters and is forecast to have 150, that's 150% of normal. If it's 70, that's 70% of normal. The reason this matters is pretty simple. Impacts are not just dependent on how much rain falls, but whether the rain is unusual for this time of year. Whether it's wetter or drier, we could see runoff or disruption. Whether the unusual dryness drives stress, even if some rainfall still occurs. Let's have a quick breakdown of the big picture pattern here. On the total precipitation map, the dominant pattern is that Indonesia carries the bulk of the volume over the next 2 weeks, with widespread rains, 80 to 200 plus millimeters across multiple islands, and some localized higher pockets. The inland is more mixed and generally lower, with many areas in the 10 to 60 millimeter range, but with wetter corridors that are pushing higher in some spots. Broad contrast, the islands are wetter than the mainland, east mainland is wetter than the far northwest, and the coast and windward terrain are wetter than the interior plains. Let's give a quick regional breakdown. Firstly, looking at the western mainland from Myanmar and the far western Thailand, the driest looking part of the region on totals, but it's not rain-free. Many zones are sitting in that 0 to 10 millimeter range, with pockets in the 10 to 20 mils, with kind of fewer localized higher amounts nearer terrain and coastal exposures. This favors more intermittent rainfall rather than sustained multi-day heavy rain events. Looking at the central mainland, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, that Mekong corridor, a moderate rain corridor with totals that build enough to matter for rivers and field access. Large areas come in around that 15 to 40 millimeter range, with scattered pockets that are 40 to 60. Some sections of the Mekong Basin and parts of central Cambodia where this zones or totals are slightly higher relative to the nearby interior areas. Looking at Vietnam, one of the wetter mainland signals, this is going to be important for that percentage of normal map we're going to look at later. We're seeing broader coverage of meaningful totals. Many areas run 40 to 80 millimeters, with localized higher pockets where showers are persistent, especially towards central Vietnam and those central highlands, important for coffee. Compared to the neighbors, Vietnam shows kind of fewer truly dry areas, meaning a more consistent wet days rather than just some isolated events. Moving on to kind of Malaysia and Singapore area, solid seasonal rainfall totals, generally moderate to locally heavy. The Malay Peninsula commonly shows between 60 to 120 millimeters, with localized higher amounts where storm clusters along coasts and terrain. Kind of around that nearby northern Borneo area, totals sit kind of in a similar range between 70 to 130 millimeters. For Indonesia and Timor-Leste, the rainfall kind of engine on the map, broad high totals across many islands. Sumatra and Java frequently sit kind of around 90 to 150 millimeters, with some higher pockets locally. Borneo, notably wetter in places, 100 to 160. Parts of Sulawesi also run in that same region, kind of 80 to 140. Farther east into Maluku and Timor-Leste, totals are more variable, but still between kind of 60 and 100 and 120 millimeters. And there are some kind of localized extreme pockets elsewhere. For the Philippines, the mixed totals are kind of in that kind of 20 to 60 range, but there are also some kind of 60 to 100 millimeter ranges also. Parts of that northern Luzon trend wetter than some central areas, while the southern islands vary sharply over short distances. Now let's switch to that percentage of normal. This is important because even though we looked at the total precipitation amounts, which were kind of variable, it's not telling us whether it's wetter or drier compared to normal. The headline change here is that the mainland looks much more anomalously wet than you would have guessed from the totals alone. Large areas from Myanmar through Thailand, Laos, Cambodia into Vietnam are running into this 150 to 250% of normal in places. Meanwhile, Indonesia often sits near or below normal, commonly 60 to 90%, even though totals were still high. This implies that this is kind of closer to typical seasonal rainfall for this area. Philippines is staying mixed with some below normal pockets, with some selectively wetter zones than normal. The key here is that you can't kind of judge a book by its cover here. We looked at the total rainfall amounts, and it looked like the Thailand and kind of Vietnam were far drier than other areas, but when we put it in context, we saw that this was far wetter than it was normally would be for this time of year, whereas Indonesia, even though it had higher amounts, is sitting kind of roughly normal. Again, let's give a quick regional breakdown looking at the percentage of normal. Let's start with Myanmar and the far west Thailand area. That headline is strong wet anomalies despite modest totals. Many areas sitting in that 150 to 250% of normal with localized higher spikes, meaning that the rain frequency is elevated for the season, even though the absolute totals aren't huge. Moving into Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, a broad above normal swath along that Mekong region with numerous zones running 130 to 210 with some localized pockets pushing even higher. This is raising a situation where the totals alone are not actually giving the full story. Moving on to Vietnam, consistently above normal, again supportive of a repeated shower activity. Much of Vietnam is trending in that 150 to 200% of normal, kind of aligning with the idea of unseasonal showers continuing for stretches rather than isolated hits. Looking at Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, closer to seasonal expectations with some pockets that are slightly above normal. Many areas are clustered in that 90 to 130% range, indicating a kind of more typical convective pattern with locally enhanced corridors. Indonesia and Timor-Leste, near to slightly below normal, kind of dominates these key coffee zones. Southern Sumatra, Western Java, often sitting in that 60 to 90% range with some areas closer to near normal. Other islands are mixed, but the prevailing theme here is it's raining, but not unusually more so. Philippines, patchy. Some areas are wetter than normal, others are lagging. We're seeing kind of a spread here from 70 to 110% in many spots, with some selective areas that are far higher. Now, what are the impacts here? What's likely? On the mainland, the above normal signal increases odds of localized flooding, saturated fields, slower fieldwork, especially along that Mekong corridor into Vietnam. For Robusta coffee, Vietnam's central highlands are getting repeated unseasonal showers, which can trigger early flowering. And that can be positive if moisture stays steady right after the initiation, but we could see some issues here. In Indonesia, that near to slightly below normal rainfall in southern Sumatra and western Java is generally supportive of developing coffee cherries, kind of keeping soils favorable without persistent excess moisture. What are the conditional impacts here? What can change very quickly if we see some movement of the weather? If the mainland anomaly concentrates into multi-day training storms, floods, landslide risks escalate very quickly. If Vietnam flips drier immediately after flowering, we're risking uneven set unless it's irrigated and the moisture management can take hold. So there could be some problems here with Vietnam coffee. If we see a flip in the forecast, we see heavy rains triggering early flowering and then a cutoff of moisture, we could have problems with Vietnam coffee. If you like these videos and you want to see more, please like and subscribe to the Weather Mapping YouTube channel, and I'll see you on the next one. Laters.